After a man with notoriously bad breath committed a brutal crime, to put it lightly, he saw the writing on the wall and fled. The police were left with no choice but to search for him for nearly 20 years, only to find him in a situation nobody would have imagined. Before we start, I'm happy to say that I've partnered with MyHeritage while making this video. MyHeritage is an online genealogy platform with all sorts of services, like photo sharing, family trees, and all sorts of historical records related to your family that you can look through. MyHeritage is committed to privacy and never sells or leases out any of your genetic data, which puts them in a unique spot. For today, I've decided to take a DNA test and figure out my own genealogy. Taking the test was pretty simple. I got a test kit in the mail, did a quick cheek swab, put it back into the box, and simply sent it back. With my DNA results, I'm expecting to see a lot of Western European in there, probably a lot of German, but hey, I might be wrong, and let's just say that I probably am. While I wait, I decided to check out the photo features on the website. Here you can enhance, colorize, and even animate old family photos. You can really see these older family members in a whole new way that makes them seem more, well, real. And now that I've got the email back with my test results, I'm ready to open them up and check them out. Alright, I'm opening the results right here. Let's see what we get. I'm 42.5% Scandinavian, 26.7% Irish, Scottish, and Welsh, 19% Iberian. I wouldn't have expected that. Got 10.9% Eastern European in there, and then I've got 0.9% Italian. Then here on the DNA matches page, you can see I've got some first cousins, well, parents' first cousins here I've matched with. I actually have never heard of any of these people. Yeah, these are family members I would have never even known existed, basically. So why don't you go ahead and give MyHeritage a shot? MyHeritage has a promotion going on right now. Just click on the link in the description below or use the QR code down there and use my coupon code DIRETRIP to get free shipping. Whenever someone of a foreign nationality commits a crime, there's always kind of that risk that they may flee back to their home country in order to avoid justice. After all, it would give them an opportunity to completely start over, especially if it's a country that isn't too keen on extraditing their criminals. This is a case that involved a lot of that sort of fear, but little did anyone know the criminals' whereabouts were nothing at all like what they imagined them to be. Our story begins with a man named Tuen Kit Dicky Lee, a Chinese national who moved over to the United States. He settled down in Quincy, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston, where he ran a Japanese restaurant called Kagawa with his family. Tuen Lee worked as one of the managers in the restaurant and was put in charge of hiring. Taking a bit of advantage of this aspect of his job duties, he hired women he fancied to be waitresses. One of these women was a person who has gone unnamed, so we'll just refer to her as Jane from here on out. Jane, while being content with her job, was pretty creeped out by Lee. She was especially disgusted by his monumentally bad breath. Lee decided that he wanted to have his way with Jane, but he wasn't going to go about that in the traditional sort of way. Lee was much more of a shady individual than that. On February 2nd, 2005, he decided to head out to Jane's house, dressed in all black. Arriving at the home, he slipped on a black ski mask and made his way into her home by way of breaking and entering. He then held Jane at knife point before zip-tying her hands to a bed, leaving her face down and gagging her. Then he brutally assaulted her, again and again over the course of hours. After he was done, he robbed her as well before making his way out of the home. Jane was left there for hours until her boyfriend came over to check on her and found her that way. He freed her, and the two immediately contacted the police. While Jane couldn't see any physical traits of her attacker, there was one aspect of him that was unmistakable: his horrific, rank-ass breath. In fact, she specifically told the police that she had no information to give him other than that he had really bad breath, quote, just like her boss. With that, the police were able to track Lee down and pretty easily arrest him. By using a DNA test kit, they were able to find out that Lee was, without a shadow of a doubt, the attacker they were looking for. Tuen Lee was thrown into police custody to await his trial. Immediately, he wasn't faring too well in jail. While confined, he was attacked and beaten by another inmate. Lee quickly came to realize that he wasn't cut out for the inmate life. It appears that, at some point, Lee was let out while awaiting his court date on a $100,000 cash bail. When his court date came around, Lee showed up and had to testify. Alongside his lawyer, Phil Tracy Jr., he gave his side of the story, saying that his act with Jane was fully consensual, despite her body being found bound and gagged, tied up with zip ties for hours on end, and robbed. Needless to say, the judge wasn't buying it. After many more witnesses and related parties came to testify, Lee's prospects of getting out of this as a free man were looking pretty bleak. The court decided to rest for the day and come back the next to come to a final decision. One day after giving his testimony, it came time for the sentencing. When he didn't show up to court for the sentence, the public wondered if he was simply late. When he didn't show up at all, they realized this was not the case. Lee's lawyer, Tracy, went up to a few female family members of his to ask them where the hell he was. They both said that they had no idea and had shown up there to support him. At best, Lee was ducking his sentencing. At worst, he had fled completely. Unfortunately, the latter was true. The night after giving his testimony, Lee realized that he was completely screwed and fled the state entirely. The authorities were very worried that he might have gone back to China and they would lose their chance to incarcerate him. Despite not showing up for the sentencing, the judge and jury had already heard more than enough to come to a decision. They went on ahead and went through their deliberations regardless. That September, Tuen Lee was convicted in absentia for what he had done back in February. He was found guilty in the Norfolk Superior Court of 4 counts of rape, kidnapping, and miscellaneous other charges. If he would have showed up, he was facing a possible life sentence. However, now the police and the courts had a much bigger problem on their hands, finding him in the first place. It became pretty clear that Lee was no longer in Massachusetts. Any lead that the police followed up on came back with nothing. After tracking his family for a while, it did appear that they did not know where he was and that they weren't harboring him either. If that wasn't the case, they were going to have to find some other way to track him down. Over the years, they ran multiple campaigns in association with the media in order to get the word out there. In 2007, Lee's case would come to be featured on none other than America's Most Wanted with John Walsh. In the episode, they aired a portion of Lee's interrogation, as well as interviews with the Quincy police detective John Menz, who led the investigation, and the Norfolk County District Attorney William Keating. Even after this episode, however, they came no closer to finding Lee at all. He was just completely gone. During this time, though, the police never gave up on searching for Lee at all. In fact, they continued to search for nearly 20 years. In August of 2023, they offered up a $10,000 reward just for information that may lead to his whereabouts. While they still harbored the fear that Lee may not even be in the country anymore, little did they know that he was actually still in the United States, living his best life. When Lee fled all the way back in 2007, he gradually made his way out to California. He took odd jobs here and there, trying to remain on the down low, becoming somewhat of a ghost in order to stay hidden. After many years doing this, though, Lee came to get a little bit more bold. He was tired of hiding and wanted to get back to living a somewhat normal life. Making his way out to San Francisco, one day Lee was sitting at a bus stop. There he met a woman named Jie Su, a wealthy businesswoman in the local area. Tuen Lee introduced himself as Randy Lee, and the two quickly came to fall for one another. Over a short period of time, this blew up into a full-on relationship. Lee started working as an assistant in Sue's shop, mainly having duties consisting of cleaning and pruning flowers. After a while, Lee got into working as a landscaper for another business that Sue owned. Having no idea about his past, she moved him in with her to her home in Danville on the eastern side of the San Francisco Bay Area, where they came to live together as a happy couple for years as, back home, the police were desperately searching for the man she only knew as Randy. Jisoo has said that Randy always had a bit of an air of mystery about him. Whenever she would ask him about his past, he would either respond with vague answers or brush her off entirely and change the subject. She never met anyone from his family, and he didn't seem to have any friends either. Sue has since said, "I suggested we visit his family, and he didn't want to. He said there was an issue with them, and I said maybe I could help make things better. He didn't want to talk. I thought he just had financial problems." Being that Lee was anything but wealthy when the two met, Sue felt that he was most likely running from some debts back home. As it turns out, she did indeed know that he was a fugitive, but was never told what for. Little did Sue know, Lee's past consisted of something a lot worse than debts or financial problems, though. Back in Massachusetts, the police were still looking for Lee all the way up to when they offered the substantial reward in 2023. Around the time when that $10,000 reward was posted up, people began to scour social media for any kind of profile that might fit an aged-up Tuen Lee. Someone who fit that bill pretty well was discovered, and the information was soon passed on to the police. The police really weren't quite sure yet that this was their man, especially that he had aged for nearly 20 years, but it was a very promising lead nonetheless. The only problem was that he didn't really make his location known on his profile. However, after studying the account for months, by 2024 the police were pretty confident that they had their man. After a major break, the state police were able to find that Lee was living in a $4.3 million mansion out in Danville, California, owned by a wealthy businesswoman. The U.S. Marshals Service Pacific Southwest Regional Fugitive Task Force was called to the task after detectives back in Massachusetts confirmed that this was most likely the guy they were looking for. Tuen Kit Lee was believed to have fled Massachusetts, but his location was unknown until investigators with the Massachusetts State Police, VFAS, developed information that Lee was possibly staying in Diablo, California, the U.S. Marshal Service wrote. While Lee had no ownership of the home, they had come to fully believe that he was living there. After watching the home for a week or so, the police came to discover that the couple had a pretty clear, regular routine. It wouldn't be hard to wait for them to go about their day and confront them in public. All those working on the case, even detectives from back in Massachusetts, came to stake out the home. On one normal Tuesday morning, it wasn't too long before they saw a woman leaving the house with a man trailing behind her. The two got into a car and left the property, so the police quietly chased after them, monitoring them along the way. They stopped the couple at a quote-unquote random traffic stop shortly after at an intersection. After they pulled the car over, Lee at first told the police that his name was Randy. However, after a bit of pressing about his true identity, he finally relented and admitted that he was indeed Tuen K. Lee. After all these years, 17 to be specific, the Massachusetts police finally had Tuen Lee back in custody for what he had done way back then. After identifying him by his fingerprints, they could now conclude without a shadow of a doubt that their search was over. They finally had the bad breath rapist back in custody. It goes without saying that the police were pretty happy to finally have made their arrest.
Someone who's been on the run for 17 years has probably gotten pretty comfortable. It's unique that there hasn't been additional crimes that maybe we haven't seen, especially with something as violent as it was. Cold cases, they get so gruesome that sometimes you just want to give up. You think you've done everything, you think you've interviewed everyone, you think there's nothing left to do. And it just takes that effort for someone to just keep pushing. There was a moment of denial for him, I think in shock, where he, didn't really want to say who he was, but he knew the gig was up. Was able to kind of continue in his ways, being a quiet person who, worked some odd jobs to lay low. While we all take a moment to appreciate what we had, that this was safe, we all just now have to move on to the next case because there's many more people that need to be arrested and many more that, want justice.
Sean LaFiccolo, acting commander of the U.S. Marshals Service Pacific Southwest Regional Fugitive Task Force, made a statement to the public saying, Tuen Lee was on the run for more than 16 years, and the unwavering dedication by law enforcement to locate and arrest him hopefully brings peace of mind to the victim and her family. Now 55 years old, Tuen Lee was in custody with the Danville police awaiting extradition back to Massachusetts. Those who knew him in California were left with nothing to do but absorb all of this information and come to terms with Tuen Lee's true identity. Lee's neighbors in Danville were interviewed by the media, all in shock about finding out who their friendly neighbor really was. A woman named Laura Markstein said, "He was actually apprehended very close to where I live. The thought that someone had been living there a very long time is pretty scary." She said that while she didn't know Lee all that well at all, she was happy to see him gone, finishing by saying, "I am just certainly glad he's caught. Hopefully they will hold him accountable and the victim will feel some justice." Now, once again known as the Bad Breath Rapist, Lee called Sue from jail. He told her to pretend that she never met him and move on with her life, saying that he most likely was going to die in jail. He apologized for turning her life upside down and told her that it would be best if she started all over. Sue wrote, "He said, 'I'm so sorry, just pretend you never met me. Take care of yourself. I love you so much.' He said he might die inside the jail and that he was sorry he made so much chaos for me." Even now knowing what Lee was hiding in his past, Sue was definitely shocked, but ultimately not all too bothered about it. While they never actually got engaged, she did feel that they were on the road to marriage and still considers him to be her fiancé. She told Lee as much over the phone, and he asked her to give him some time to think. Sue told the Post, "I want to marry him. I believe he made a mistake, but I don't believe he's a bad person. Everybody likes him. He's very gentle to a woman. He takes care of me a lot." With that, Sue said that she wasn't intending on leaving him and would fully support him in any way she could moving forward. It wasn't too long before Tuen Lee was extradited back to Massachusetts overnight in order to avoid the press. Shortly after that, he was all set to be arraigned in a Quincy court. Now he was even going to face some extra charges for being a fugitive from the police. Immediately, the prosecution requested that Lee be given no possibility of bail, and this request was pretty quickly granted. Now they could finally move forward with the original sentencing. Lee's attorney was the very same Phil Tracy Jr., the attorney who was appointed to represent him in the original trial. Given that it had been so long and that the last case never actually got concluded, he had to go through the file and read up on everything all over again to refresh himself before the new sentencing were to take place. When it came to court, Tracy noted that Lee was very emotionally upset to the degree where he couldn't even speak with him about the proceedings. He requested a bit more time for the courts in order to calm him down and find someone to determine whether or not he would be competent enough for sentencing, or at least find someone to assist him. In interviews outside the court, Tracy described what he knew of what happened with Lee after he came to flee all those years ago. He said, "I think he tried to live quietly, tried to live a good life during that period of time, knowing that back here was something a lot more than, say, a bankruptcy or debts or things like that, which I think is what his significant other thought the problem was. It's just a sad case all around, for the victim, for him, for the woman he established a relationship with." The judge granted Tracy permission to determine whether or not a formal examination would be needed. Now the sentencing was to take place on June 20th, 2024. Tracy did not attempt to argue for Lee's release. Upon hearing this from the court-appointed translator, Lee shook his head in disappointment. Tracy did promise him, though, that he would review the whole 2007 trial once again to see if there were any, what he called, appealable issues. A psychological examination was performed on Lee, showing that he was indeed severely depressed and that this could affect his competency. However, Tracy didn't go quite as far as confirming that Lee was incompetent. Instead, he said that he had simply been living a normal life until his world was quickly and abruptly turned upside down. Tracy was asked if he had trouble communicating with Lee, to which he said no, but he added that he may not be emotionally stable enough to make choices in his own best interests. It was ultimately decided that Tracy and Lee would be given further additional time to discuss the court proceedings, and they should use that time to once and for all finally determine whether or not competency or communication issues could impact the case. If so, they were told to advise the court so that they could respond appropriately moving forward, lest waste any more time. The judge said, "The victim has been waiting for justice for a long time." Lee was stuck both grieving the loss of the life he built along with his girlfriend and with the fear of going back to prison and getting beaten up again. Tracy said of the situation, "He's mentally scrambled at this point. On the other hand, there's a day of reckoning. We're going to have to deal with it."
He had been beaten in jail early on and attacked, bitten, and so he was terrified of going back to jail, and human weakness.
The Assistant District Attorney, Lisa Beatty, asked the Norfolk Superior Court Judge, Joseph Layton, to sentence Lee to 28 to 30 years in a state prison. The judge called Lee's actions premeditated, violent, and cruel. Jane's victim statement was read as well, where she wrote of what happened during the entire incident, saying, "It left a permanent scar on my body and my soul like a dark shadow which follows me no matter where I go. There are still times when I feel the defendant's arms around my neck. I suffer from chronic panic attacks. I want nothing more than to just be normal again." Tuen Lee surprisingly actually stood to give an apology for what he had done back in 2007.
I'm so sorry for everybody. I hope God forgive me everything I do.
Now, Lee was finally left to face his fate after all this time. In August of 2024, after many delays, it was time for his sentencing. While the prosecutors had suggested 28 to 30 years in prison, a sentence of 18 to 20 years was ultimately what came to be handed down. Lee seemed to accept his fate, looking somberly down at his feet as he learned where he would be going. An attorney on the case, Michael W. Morrissey, said, "The State Police Violent Fugitive Apprehension Section and Quincy Police never forgot about this case, and that persistence finally led to Lee's capture in California. Judge Layton imposed a sentence of 18 to 20 years in state prison, followed by 5 years probation with substantial conditions. We strongly believe that a substantial period of incarceration was appropriate given the brutality of the crime and the demonstrated lack of remorse." The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Lisa Beatty, said, "This is completely unacceptable that still, in this day and age, that women are unable to live free from this kind of violence in their own homes." Tracy has said that he will appeal Lee's sentencing, calling it too severe. He says that Lee is basically a different person by now.
Most of the people that wrote letters on his behalf have obviously had no idea about this, but they all see him as they met him as Randy Lee, and they all support him as a human being.
Even if Lee comes to be released before he passes away in prison, he's going to have to register as a sex offender and wear a GPS ankle bracelet for the foreseeable future. At this point, it isn't really known if Sue has still decided to stay by Lee's side after all of this, but she hasn't specifically came out and said that she wouldn't be. Given Tracy's intent to appeal, she might be feeling a bit optimistic for the future, but given how everything looks, she might want to tone down that optimism just a little bit. By the time Lee is released from prison, giving nothing changes, he will be 73 years old at the youngest. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found the topic interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Just recently, I've started up a podcast with 4 of my friends called the NBR Podcast. If you find this channel interesting, you might like that one as well. I've also opened up a merch store. There you can get yourself some cool Dire Trip t-shirts, link in the description below. Once again, go ahead and give My Heritage a shot. Now that they've got a promotion going on right now, all you gotta do is click the link in the description below or scan my QR code and use coupon code DireTrip for free shipping. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media. There you can see what I'm up to, and hey, I really appreciate when people follow me on Patreon as well. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are up too, and you can get all the same benefits there as well, except YouTube won't quite let me show everything, you know. This has been your host, Kyle. Thank you, and good night.